My hands were shaking as I stared at the termination letter on Bryce Kellerman's desk. 26 years. 26 years of arriving early, staying late, covering for colleagues who called in sick, and watching newer hires get promoted while I kept my head down and did the work. Now, 72 hours before my retirement package would vest, $1.2 million that would secure my future and help my daughter Marley through medical school. They were throwing me away like yesterday's coffee. Sign this non-disclosure agreement, Delia, and we'll give you 6 months severance, Bryce said, his voice carrying that fake sympathy I'd heard him use with other employees he'd pushed out. His corner office smelled like expensive cologne and power, while I sat there in my sensible cardigan, feeling every one of my 58 years. Or you can walk away with nothing. Your choice. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I read the papers again. The company was restructuring, they claimed. My position was being eliminated. Coincidentally, just before the biggest payout of my career would kick in, I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, that familiar tightness in my chest that came whenever I had to confront authority. But something was different this time. Maybe it was thinking about Marley's student loans. Or maybe it was the smirk I caught Bryce trying to hide, but I felt something stirring inside me that I hadn't felt in decades. I looked up at him, this man half my age who'd been hired as my supervisor 2 years ago, despite having zero experience in our department. I need to think about it. You have until end of business today, he said, already reaching for his phone to dismiss me. I nodded quietly, gathered the papers, and walked out of his office with my spine straight. But I wasn't defeated. Not this time. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The termination papers lay on the passenger seat like a death sentence. Through the windshield, I could see other employees walking into the building where I'd spent more than half my adult life, completely unaware that their loyal colleague had just been discarded like trash. My phone buzzed. A text from my daughter Marley. "Mom, just finished my surgery rotation. Can't wait to tell you about it over dinner Sunday. Love you." The words blurred as tears threatened to spill. She had no idea her mother had just lost everything that was supposed to secure both our futures. I drove home in a daze, but instead of wallowing, I found myself pulling out every piece of company documentation I'd ever kept. Bank statements, employee handbooks, performance reviews, emails, everything spread across my dining room table like evidence at a crime scene. That's when I saw it, the pattern that had been hiding in plain sight. 3 other employees in the past 18 months, all terminated within weeks of major milestone payouts. Garrett Morrison let go 2 weeks before his 20-year bonus. Vivian Chen terminated a month before her stock options vested. And now me, 72 hours before retirement. Each time, the company claimed restructuring or performance issues, but I'd worked with these people. They were solid employees, just like me. My hands were trembling again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from rage. Pure, crystalline rage that burned away 26 years of keeping my mouth shut and my head down. I opened my laptop and began typing an email that would either save my future or destroy what little I had left. The cursor blinked at me like a heartbeat as I considered the recipients. The Department of Labor, the State Attorney General's office, our biggest client Meridian Industries, and every local news outlet I could find. I stared at the email for an hour before hitting send. The subject line read, "Systematic fraud. Deliberate termination pattern to avoid employee payouts." My finger hovered over the send button as every instinct screamed at me to delete it, to take the 6 months severance and disappear quietly like they expected. But then I thought about Marley's dreams, about Garrett who'd lost his house after losing that bonus, about Vivian who'd had to move back in with her elderly parents. Click. Send. The whoosh sound felt like jumping off a cliff. There was no taking it back now. I'd attached every document I could find, highlighted the suspicious timing, and laid out the financial impact on each victim. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Within 2 hours, my phone started ringing. First was Cassidy Brennan from Channel 7 News, her voice sharp with interest. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've reviewed your email. This is explosive if we can verify it. Can you meet tomorrow morning?" Then came calls from the Department of Labor, the Attorney General's office, and surprisingly, 3 other former employees who'd heard whispers about my email through professional networks. But the call that mattered most came at 7 p.m. "Mom?" Marley's voice was tight with worry. "I just got a weird call from someone claiming to be a reporter asking about your work situation. What's going on?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of what I'd unleashed. "Honey, I need to tell you something. And I need you to know that whatever happens next, I did it for both of us." As I explained everything, I could hear her sharp intake of breath, the way her voice changed from concern to fierce pride. "Mom, you're finally fighting back. I'm so proud of you." Her words broke something loose in my chest that had been knotted tight for decades. That's when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a woman about my age with silver hair and kind eyes, holding a bottle of wine. "Delia, I'm Vivian Chen. I think we need to talk." Vivian and I sat at my kitchen table until midnight, spreading out documents like 2 detectives solving a cold case. She'd brought her own evidence, emails, performance reviews, even recordings she'd made of meetings where supervisors praised her work just weeks before her termination. "I was too scared to fight them alone," she admitted, pouring us both another glass of wine. "But together, we can bury them." The next morning brought chaos. My phone rang at 6 a.m. Bryce's voice was ice-cold fury. "Delia, what the hell do you think you're doing? You violated your confidentiality agreement before you even signed it. Our legal department is preparing to destroy you." "I haven't signed anything, Bryce," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "And I won't be intimidated." "You have no idea what you've started. By noon today, we'll have evidence that you've been stealing from the company, falsifying records, anything we need to discredit you completely." The line went dead, but instead of fear, I felt a strange calm. They were panicking, which meant my email had hit its target. Cassidy Brennan arrived at 10 with a camera crew. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of sharp intelligence that made me understand why she'd won journalism awards. "Mrs. Whitmore, we've been investigating your former company for months following other complaints. Your documentation is the missing piece we needed." As we talked, she showed me internal company emails they'd obtained through sources. Communications between executives about managing employee costs and optimal termination timing. The smoking gun was an email from the CEO to Bryce. "Handle the Whitmore situation before her package vests. We can't afford another large payout this quarter." While the interview wrapped up, Vivian burst through my front door, her face flushed with excitement and anger. "Delia, you need to see this. They just fired Garrett Morrison's replacement. One day before his probationary period ended, and he'd qualify for benefits. It's happening again, right now." My hands clenched into fists. They weren't just covering up past crimes. They were actively committing new ones, probably thinking the intimidation tactics would silence me. But seeing that fresh victim, knowing another family was about to be devastated, ignited something volcanic inside me. "Cassidy," I called out as she packed up her equipment. "How fast can you get this story on the air?" "Tonight's 6 o'clock news," she replied with a predatory smile. "And I have a feeling this is going to be the lead story." At 5:30 p.m., I sat in my living room with Vivian, both of us staring at the television like it held our futures. The news intro music made my stomach clench with nerves and anticipation. Then Cassidy's face filled the screen, her expression serious as she began. "Tonight, An exclusive investigation into what appears to be systematic fraud at Hartwell Industries, where employees are allegedly being terminated just before major compensation packages vest. My hands were trembling as footage of the company building appeared on screen. Then came my voice, steady and clear. 26 years of loyalty, and they threw me away 72 hours before I would have received $1.2 million. But I wasn't the first, and I won't be the last unless we stop them. The story was devastating. Cassidy had uncovered 5 additional victims beyond the 4 we'd identified. The internal emails flashed across the screen, including that damning message from CEO Winston Hartwell to Bryce about handling the Whitmore situation. She'd even found a spreadsheet calculating how much money the company saved by timing terminations strategically, over $8 million in the past 3 years. My phone exploded with calls. Neighbors, former colleagues, even people I hadn't spoken to in years. But the call that made my chest tight with emotion came from Garrett Morrison. "Delia, I'm watching the news. I can't believe you did this. I lost everything because I was too scared to fight, but you're a hero." The next morning brought a different kind of chaos. Vivian arrived at 7 a.m. with coffee and newspapers. We were front-page news in 3 local papers. "Look at this," she said, spreading them across my table. "The state attorney general is opening a formal investigation. The Department of Labor is launching an audit. And get this, Hartwell Industries stock dropped 12% in after-hours trading." But the real shock came when my doorbell rang at 9 a.m. Through the peephole, I saw Bryce standing on my porch, but he looked nothing like the confident manager who dismissed me. His face was pale, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and his hands were shaking worse than mine had been in his office. "Delia, please, can we talk?" His voice cracked slightly. "The board is in emergency session. They're talking about criminal charges. I need you to know that terminating you wasn't my idea. It came from above. Way above." I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "So now you want to talk? After threatening to destroy me?" "They're throwing me under the bus," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Winston Hartwell is claiming I acted without authorization. But I have recordings, Delia. Recordings of every conversation where he ordered these terminations." I stared at Bryce through my screen door, this man who'd held my future in his hands just days ago, now looking like a cornered animal. "You have recordings?" I asked, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Everything," he said, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. I started recording meetings after the first few terminations made me uncomfortable. I knew something like this might happen. He played a snippet, Winston Hartwell's voice, clear as day. "Bryce, I don't care how you do it, but Whitmore needs to be gone before that retirement package hits. We're talking about over $1 million here." Vivian appeared beside me, having heard the conversation through the door. "Why should we trust you now?" she demanded. "You destroyed people's lives." "Because I'm about to lose everything too," Bryce said, his voice breaking. "My wife, my kids, my career. Winston's already leaked to the press that I was operating a rogue termination scheme without company knowledge. But I have proof that's a lie." I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the old instinct to avoid confrontation, to let someone else handle the mess. But then I thought about all the employees who'd been silenced, all the families destroyed, all the futures stolen. "Give me the recordings," I said. "All of them." Within an hour, Cassidy Brennan was back at my kitchen table, her eyes wide as she listened to file after file of damning evidence. Winston Hartwell's voice ordering terminations, discussing the employee cost problem, even laughing about how these people never fight back anyway. The recordings painted a picture of systematic, cold-blooded fraud spanning years. "This is beyond anything I imagined," Cassidy said, her hands shaking as she took notes. We're not just talking about wrongful termination anymore. This is conspiracy, wire fraud, potentially RICO charges. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Whitmore? This is Janet Reeves from the FBI's White Collar Crime Division. We've been monitoring the news coverage and the Attorney General's investigation. We'd like to meet with you tomorrow morning. That evening, as Vivian and I sat processing everything that had happened, my daughter Marley arrived unexpectedly. She wrapped me in a fierce hug, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, do you know what you've done? There are people on social media calling you a hero. Someone started a hashtag, Don't Silence Delia. You've given a voice to everyone who's ever been pushed around by their employer." I looked at my daughter, this brilliant young woman who was going to be a doctor, who was going to heal people and make the world better. For the first time in decades, I felt like I was worthy of being her mother. The FBI field office felt like stepping into a television show. Agent Janet Reeves was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who treated me with a respect I'd never experienced from authority figures. "Mrs. Whitmore, what you've uncovered here goes far beyond wrongful termination. We're looking at a criminal enterprise that's defrauded employees of over $8 million. Sitting across from her polished conference table, I felt the weight of how much my life had changed in just 1 week. "What happens now?" I asked. "We're executing search warrants on Hartwell Industries today. We have enough evidence for federal charges against Winston Hartwell and potentially the entire board of directors." She paused, studying my face. "But we need you to wear a wire." My blood went cold. "A wire? Winston Hartwell has been calling your phone all morning, hasn't he? He wants to meet, to make this go away. We need you to get him to admit his crimes on tape." I thought about the missed calls, the increasingly desperate voicemails from Winston begging me to meet him, promising me everything I deserved and more. The old Delia would have been terrified, but something had fundamentally shifted inside me over the past week. I'll do it. 2 hours later, I sat in an upscale restaurant downtown, a tiny recording device hidden in my jacket, waiting for the man who'd tried to steal my future. Winston Hartwell looked haggard when he arrived, his usual confidence replaced by barely controlled panic. "Delia, thank God you agreed to meet me," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "This has all gotten out of hand. The media, the FBI, it's insane." "Is it insane, Winston? Or is it justice?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Look, I know how this looks, but you have to understand the pressure I was under. The board, the shareholders, they demanded cost cuts. When I saw how much money we were hemorrhaging in retirement packages and bonuses, I had to act. So you decided to steal from your own employees." "It wasn't stealing," he hissed, then caught himself, glancing around nervously. "It was strategic resource management. But I can fix this. I can make sure you get your full retirement package, plus interest, plus a settlement for emotional distress. We're talking $2 million, Delia. All you have to do is convince the FBI that this was all a misunderstanding." I felt a strange calm wash over me as I looked at this man who'd built his fortune on the backs of loyal employees. What about Vivian? Garrett? All the others? Them too. Everyone gets made whole. But I need you to call off the dogs first. "I can't do that, Winston." His face hardened. "You have no idea what you're playing with here. I have connections, resources. I can make your life very difficult." "You already tried to destroy my life," I said, standing up. "The difference is, now I'm not afraid to fight back." I walked out of that restaurant feeling like I was floating. The weight that had pressed down on my shoulders for 26 years was finally gone. Within minutes, FBI agents moved in to arrest Winston, and I watched through the window as they led him away in handcuffs. The man who'd held so much power over so many lives looked small and pathetic as he was pushed into the back of a government sedan. Agent Reeves met me in the parking lot, her face bright with satisfaction. "Mrs. Whitmore, that recording just sealed our case. His admission of strategic resource management and the attempted bribery, we have everything we need for conspiracy, wire fraud, and witness tampering charges." The next morning brought the kind of chaos I was starting to get used to. My phone rang constantly with interview requests, but the call that mattered most came from Cassidy Brennan. "Delia, you need to turn on Channel 7 right now." I flipped on the television just in time to see breaking news footage of FBI agents carrying boxes out of Hartwell Industries while employees gathered on the sidewalk, some crying, others cheering. The news ticker read, "CEO, Winston Hartwell, arrested in multi-million-dollar employee fraud scheme." But the real shock came when Cassidy appeared on screen with a follow-up report. "In a stunning development, the FBI has recovered detailed records showing Hartwell Industries systematically targeted employees nearing major compensation milestones. The scheme affected dozens of families and saved the company over $10 million in legitimate payouts." Then came the part that made tears stream down my face. The screen showed employee after employee stepping forward to tell their stories, people I'd worked with for years, people who'd been too afraid to speak up before. Margaret Donnelly from accounting terminated 2 weeks before her pension fully vested. Carlos Rivera from maintenance let go days before his health insurance would have covered his wife's cancer treatment. Marcus Webb from sales fired hours before a major commission payment. The courage of one woman, Delia Whitmore, has given voice to dozens of victims, Cassidy continued. What started as one person's fight for justice has exposed what federal prosecutors are calling one of the largest employment fraud schemes in state history. My doorbell rang, and I opened it to find a crowd of my former colleagues on my front porch. They were holding flowers, cards, and tears in their eyes. Margaret stepped forward first. "Delia, we owe you everything. You did what none of us were brave enough to do." "We always knew something was wrong," Carlos added, his voice thick with emotion. "But you had the strength to fight for all of us." Standing there surrounded by people who'd once walked past my desk without acknowledgement, I realized this was my climax moment. Not the FBI arrest or the news coverage, but this. Being seen, being valued, being recognized as someone who mattered. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courthouse watching Winston Hartwell receive a sentence of 12 years in prison for conspiracy, wire fraud, and racketeering. The judge's words echoed through the packed courtroom. "Mr. Hartwell, you systematically preyed upon the loyalty and trust of hardworking employees. Your actions represent a betrayal of the most fundamental principles of fair employment." Vivian squeezed my hand as we listened to victim impact statements. Garrett Morrison spoke about losing his home and having to move his family in with relatives. Margaret Donnelly talked about working 3 part-time jobs to make ends meet after losing her pension. When my turn came, I stood on shaking legs, but my voice was strong and clear. "Your Honor, Winston Hartwell didn't just steal money from us. He stole our sense of security, our trust in the system, our belief that hard work and loyalty matter. But in trying to silence us, he awakened something powerful, the knowledge that we have value, that we deserve respect, and that we have the right to fight for what's ours." The aftermath was swift and complete. Hartwell Industries was forced into bankruptcy, with all assets liquidated to pay restitution. Every affected employee received their full compensation plus damages. I walked away with my complete retirement package, $1.2 million, plus an additional $800,000 in punitive damages. But the money, as wonderful as it was for securing Marley's future and my own, wasn't the real prize. The real transformation was in how the world treated me now. Companies across the state reached out, wanting me to consult on employee relations and fraud prevention. I'd been invited to speak at conferences, to share my story with other workers who felt powerless in the face of corporate abuse. Last week, I received a letter that made me cry happy tears. It was from a woman named Patricia Delacroix in Tennessee who'd seen my story on national news. She'd been facing a similar situation, terminated just before her 25-year service award would have triggered a substantial bonus. "Your courage gave me the strength to fight back," she wrote. "The Department of Labor is now investigating my company, too. Thank you for showing me that one person can make a difference." Marley graduated medical school debt-free, her education fully funded by the settlement. At her graduation ceremony, she introduced me to her classmates not as my mom, but as my hero, the woman who taught me that standing up for what's right is always worth the risk. As I sit here now, reflecting on how dramatically my life changed in the span of 1 week, I realize that the woman who walked into Bryce Kellerman's office that day, meek, compliant, invisible, no longer exists. In her place stands someone who understands her own worth, someone who refuses to be silenced or dismissed. Today marks exactly 1 year since I walked out of Bryce Kellerman's office with that termination letter in my trembling hands. As I write this, I'm sitting in my new home office, a space I designed specifically for the consulting work that's become my passion. The walls are covered with thank you letters from employees across the country who found their voices after hearing my story. The woman I was a year ago feels like a stranger now. That Delia accepted disrespect as normal, believed that keeping quiet was safer than speaking up, thought that her 26 years of loyalty meant nothing to people who saw her only as a line item on a budget sheet. She was wrong about all of it. This morning, I received an email that brought everything full circle. Bryce Kellerman, who'd cooperated with the FBI investigation and received a reduced sentence of 3 years, wrote to me from federal prison. "Delia," his message read, "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I want you to know that watching you fight back changed something in me, too. You showed me what real courage looks like. When I get out, I want to spend the rest of my career making sure what we did to you never happens to anyone else. I've been invited to testify before Congress next month about strengthening employment protection laws. The scared woman who once avoided eye contact with her supervisor will be speaking to senators and representatives about the rights of American workers. Sometimes I catch glimpses of that old, fearful person in the mirror, but she's just a shadow now, a reminder of who I used to be before I discovered my own power. Marley is doing her residency at Johns Hopkins, saving lives and making me proud every single day. Vivian and I have become the closest of friends, and together we've started a foundation that provides legal aid to employees facing wrongful termination. Garrett Morrison got his house back and now works with us, sharing his story to help others recognize the warning signs of employment fraud. The money was wonderful. Don't get me wrong. Financial security after decades of worry is a gift I treasure every day. But the real treasure was learning that I matter, that my voice has power, that standing up for what's right can change not just your own life, but the lives of countless others. People ask me all the time if I regret not just taking that 6-month severance and walking away quietly. The answer is always the same. Never. Not for a single second. Because sometimes, when you're backed into a corner and everything seems hopeless, that's exactly when you discover what you're truly made of. The system counted on my silence. They counted on my fear. They were wrong. Now tell me, what would you do if you were in my place? Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and comment where you're watching from.